Hey everyone! Welcome back to another AMA session. AMA Sunday. Let me switch my camera. Too many buttons on this. There we go. How's everyone doing? Oh yeah! There's one thing I realized today, and it's probably that I need a bigger desk. Got too much stuff on my desk with a drawing tablet, like my keyboard, controllers, mouse, everything on it. I got my little server here as well. Getting too cramped. Starting to set your sights on the desk for my diorama. It's a lot of fun. Hell yeah. Yeah, I think the chair is in a good place for now, right? Even if we're gonna do like a feedback on it later. Like at some point it's also just fun to start like a new thing and then do like polish when you figured out the lighting and all that stuff in the engine as well. Need a new desk. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure when I'm gonna get one. Maybe in a couple of years or so. Because this desk is good. It's like solid wood as well, so. Okay, cool. Yeah, gonna try some new stuff today. It's pretty interesting. Like it's pretty quiet. Pretty quiet lately on these streams. I'm excited. Yeah, me too. I think this could be good. So today I'm planning to do some experiments in the second half, just with feedback and probably do some overpaints as well. And I'm thinking just to spice it up, to make it more interesting, just to do that like from this point on. I think it's also going to be helpful for people, just to get like a second opinion on stuff. And I mean, it's also going to make me better, which is giving feedback on the fly too. So that's definitely a bonus. So it's a win-win. Hey, Adam. How's it going? Definitely. All right, but first, we're gonna dive into some community questions. We got a load today, so let's dive into them. We got the first question from Louis Mesquita. Is it possible to skip an art test? For example, if you pass an art test, was offered the job, but for some reason you couldn't accept, and in a later moment you apply for the same role again. Can you ask if you skipped the test once, since you already passed it before? I mean, I would go for it. Honestly, I would definitely mention that. Like, look, I applied. It all depends on the timeline, right? Like, if you applied there, like, 5 years ago, and then you pass an art test, then it might be time to do like a new art test. But if it's 6 months ago, that's totally different, right? So it totally depends on the timeline there. But look, honestly, if you can skip an art test, if you already passed it before, I would definitely just reach out to them and just mention like, look, I did this before. I did this before at this time period. Like, can I just skip it? I would definitely ask that question. Because the less art tests you do, the better. Yeah, a pretty simple answer, but I would definitely ask them, 100%. And then we got another question from Louis Mesquita. What do you expect to see from a 15-day art test? I imagine some people will spend 10 hours a day working on it, while others won't have so much time. So how do they measure your final result and compare it to other competitors? Yeah, that is a really good question, right? Because it basically comes down to finding a balance between students that have basically all the time in the world compared to another person that already is in the industry, for example, or has like another job that they need to work on. Hold on. Imagine starting an art test company where you test artists with unique concepts on a deadline, and if a company wants to see their result, you can do that at any point, and the results expire after like 3 to 6 months. Kind of like formalized ArtStation. Hey, hold on. Wait, you test artists with unique concepts on a deadline? If the company wants to see their results, they can do so. I mean, there is something to that. But it's... how are you going to get people to do the art tests? Right? Because, I mean... It could work when it's already up and running. It's just getting it started is a difficulty, right? Because you need to pull people in to do art tests, but also pull companies in to say like, hey, look, we got this really cool results when you don't have any results yet. But, oh man. I honestly wouldn't do that. Like, as an artist, right? Like, thinking back at my student days, I would just be like, fuck it, I want to do stuff that I want to do. If for example, like, the concept would align with what I would want to do, then yeah, I would jump in. But, I don't know. Usually, that doesn't happen that often. But it is a cool idea, though. I like the thinking about that. But man, the results expire after 3 to 6 months. That's also a tough one for artists to swallow, right? Where your work just disappears. I mean, you can put it on your own ArtStation, of course, but it could be cool. Yeah, back to the question though. Like, what did they expect to see from a 15-day art test? That's again, really good question. I would say 15-day art test, in my opinion, is already way too long. Usually what happens, and this is we talked about this before in like another AMA session, but I'm a big fan of testing people on what you see is lacking in their skill set. Because, for example, you send your portfolio off to a company. That company is interested, but then they still want to test you. That means that there's like a specific thing that they're missing that they want to see from you. So in some cases, that's just like working to a deadline. Or in some cases, that's just like, modeling skills, not sure about that. Let's test that, right? So I'm a big fan of more specific tests and way shorter as well. Where you can do a modeling test without any worry about texturing and all that stuff. Because for example, as a level artist at Ubisoft, you're not going to be texturing that much anyway. I mean, it can happen, but it's not going to be part of your daily routine. That's for sure. Unless you become more a pro artist, right? So what did they expect to see from an art test? It always depends on what they're missing from your portfolio. So it's a tricky thing to answer, right? And it gets even trickier, like you mentioned, like how do they measure the final result compared to the other competitors? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Because that's the thing that I've been wondering too with our art tests. I'm not going to go too deep into them, but I was asking the same thing. Like how can we honestly compare these when some people already have industry experience, when some people have like more time to spend in a day? Because yeah, usually we just look at the final result, right? We don't really look at the journey that went into that final result. That's why I'm also a fan of people that put in like a little text document saying like, look, this was my workflow. This was what I was thinking at this day. Sort of like a diary, but then you can read it and get into the mindset that they were thinking. Where sometimes people do it afterwards, and you can tell that it's sort of like, I think I was doing that on this day. But yeah, that always yeah, I would say like usually we just compare the end result, right? And then try to factor in the time that the person could spend on it too. So yeah, how do they measure the final result compared to the other competitors? It's just looking at the final result, seeing what you achieved, and trying to dig into like your artistic insight. Because technical execution is like one thing, right? And I keep mentioning this, like the technical execution is one thing, but it's interesting to have or to dig into like the artistic insight, like what was the thought behind like the lighting here or like the composition here. It's always better to dive into like the underlying stuff. But yeah, we try to keep it in mind as best as possible, but it's tough. It's tough. Yeah. And then just what do they expect to see? Again, it's highly dependent on what they want to test you for. Because usually what happens is they give you a test. Usually it's a standardized test, so everyone gets the same test, but artists that give you a test want to see a specific outcome. So for example, if you already have knowledge about I'm thinking about the Star Citizen one, right? Because that is so publicly available. I'm just thinking about, you already know the decal workflow. And if they still want to test you that, then it's more about something else, right? You already know like the core workflow that they have, but like how can you do like the final polish on the materials to make them look really nice? Or how can you light it up in a realistic way? That could also be like a testing criteria. It's all within the same test, right? So you're still doing all the modeling and all the decals and all that stuff. But what the artist, what the company wants to see out of it could be different compared to, well, on a case-by-case basis. So yeah. That's the thing with a lot of these questions, right? It's really hard to give like a satisfactory answer because it's so case dependent and there's so much variables that go into it. But yeah, I hope that helped. I've had 2-week art tests and it was maddening. Well, I've had multiple 2-week art tests in a row, so I can definitely imagine. But I mean, at that point, it's just you gotta do what you gotta do, right? And that's also, I mean, from the outside looking in, right? That's just like the mindset that I always worked in. I was just like, okay, like if this is what I have to do to get in, I'll just do it. But now, looking back at it, and maybe being in a position where I can influence the process a little bit, it would just be nice to have to have like a smaller artists and more specific artists. Like that's the thing, right? Because most of the time what we do is we see that you might be lacking in modeling skills. Then why not give like a modeling specific test? You don't need to be texturing. Because we know that you can texture already. You've proven that with your portfolio. And you've proven that also in the interview, right? Because at that point, usually when you get offered an artist, usually you already have done like a first interview. So, yeah. On the other hand, I had a 3-day artist where the company gave me a whole area to research and build. I wish I had a week or two. Well, yeah. Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like, it has to be within reason, always. Like, 3-day artist to give you like a whole area to research and build. That's not gonna work. Yeah, that's just as rough. Yeah, I hope that we're gonna see some changes. Some changes in the future. I'm curious to see where this is gonna change in the future. I think it's not Dylan, right? It's Adam in the chat. I think. So confusing with all the names. I felt like they needed to open the role to recruit someone they wanted specifically, and went, well, we know who we want, but if you can pull it off in 3 days, I guess we want you too. Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, that could be the case, right? You never know. That's definitely crunch. Well, it depends, right? You're not getting paid for it. So that's also another thing. We can dive into that on another time. Because technically, right? Like, ideally, what they should do is offer you an artist that is doable within the given time. But what usually happens is that people, I mean, everyone tries to do their best thing because it's like a ticket into the industry. So what are you going to get out of it? Like, they're not going to be like, oh, I worked on this for 4 hours, I'm just going to stop and then just chill out for another 4 hours. No. Like, they're going to try to do their best and they're going to try to fill that amount of time. So that's usually what happens, right? Yeah, such an interesting topic. I am curious. I mean, people seem to be getting more open about it too. Because there's also another thing to balance it with, right? Because I'm thinking about how should I say it? Like, I'm thinking about it in another way, where say you wanna, and this is my big assumption, right? So don't take this as like given through, but let's say you wanna enter like CIG, like the people that work on Star Citizen. Everyone probably had to go through the same artist. So you know that everyone that's there had to go through the same artist to get to that position. So it creates this weird bond of like, oh, we went to the same boot camp. It's sort of like what do they call it? Like in the military, like Hell Week or something, right? You know that everyone went through that, and you have this thing in common that you can then relate yourself to, because you know that you're in what do you say? Like in a company where everyone had to go through the same process. I'm wondering if that is a factor that plays into it, and if they do that on purpose. Again, an assumption on my side, right? So I don't know if that's sure, like a certainty. Yeah, interesting. We gotta go to the next question now. Feel free to keep the discussion though. I struggled as much with this and that, and then people can relate to that and comment on their own experience. Yeah, exactly. I think that is also like a big discussion point where yep, because predictable artists are otherwise a bad idea. I agree. Because, yeah, that's also a factor that plays into it, right? I know that we're going off tangents left and right, but... because that's probably the only reason why they allow you to publish it, right? Because there's so many artists that don't allow you to publish it or like put it on your portfolio. And then we can go into like the whole topic of like, is it good to have like a failed artist on your portfolio? Because, I mean, it's kind of weird, right? Like, I did this artist and I failed, and then I'm gonna put it on my portfolio, and then basically you're showing all your flaws on your portfolio then. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, let's go to the next topic though. We got a question from Sora here. When you have some references of an environment, how much freedom do you take when adding, changing, or removing assets so it looks better? It's important to follow exactly the concept or achieve a good looking scene. It's always, in my opinion, always more important to follow, or like to find a good looking scene. Like when I took a concept, I'm always imagining how I can make it better. I don't stick to the concept that much. Even when I was a student, right? Like, well, to be honest, as a student, I never really looked at concepts. I always focused on references instead of concepts. So it might be a tricky one to answer on that front. But at this point, I can look at an image and, I mean, this is from experience, right? So this is not equating myself to like students. But at this point, I can just say like, oh, I look at this concept and then I'll probably cut out some stuff, or I'll probably add some stuff that might be interesting for storytelling. Because a thing that happens is concept is 2D, and oftentimes there are things that you miss when you translate it through to 3D. Also, we are working towards like a game art role, right? So what you should be doing is keeping the player into account and like think about like how they would interact with this environment, where a 2D artist doesn't have to think about that. It's an awesome image and it needs to pull you into their world, but they don't have to think about the interaction that happens afterwards. That's where we come in as 3D environment artists. So I try to strip it down to the core of the concept. What is this concept trying to say? And then remove or add stuff based on that. So let's say, for example, you know what? Let's see if I can bring up like a quick example. Might be way better. Oh, actually, if you go to my portfolio, there's probably like a good example for that. Do I have... Hold on, just bear with me while I dig up some links. Because I'm thinking back at one of the challenges that I did. So let's see if I can compare them side by side. Okay, let's switch up my screens too. Hold on. Sorry for the slight interruption. Overpaint, there we go. Okay, cool. So this is one of the things, like one of the concepts that we had for the ArtStation challenge that was in 2017. And this was the concept that was given to us. And we had like breakdowns on how stuff was constructed and like the references for them. But there was some stuff that you either need to add because it's too ambiguous in the concept, or was just stuff that I wanted to change. Well, I didn't talk to the concept artist on this one, so I was basically basing everything on these images and then trying to reconstruct it. But you can already see that. Let me grab that here. That I basically added, like, right. That I basically added, like, the whole foreground. That's like all new, right? Because that's not really in there. Like, there's no real trees here. There's like smaller trees here and there between the rocks. But I decided to fill it up a little bit more. And that's also because, first of all, framing, right? You can kind of see that I really went deep with all these elements, and that we have this curve going here, and this curve can also lead to this, where it leads to this point. Same happens with this mountain, leads to that point. We have this curve, right? Like this leads to there. This curve also leads to there. And we have like this whole black foreground pushing your eyes more upwards into the frame itself. Because going from this to this, the hardest thing I had to do here was taking this vertical frame and putting it into a horizontal frame. That was the thing that I had the most difficulty with. So I had to like really expand the framing here and then try to have like a really exaggerated like camera angle where I had to push everything in here basically. But yeah, you can see that most of the elements are still here, right? Like I made, like you can see these elements which are like represented here. I made a gate out of them. You can see the traditional like Chinese awnings and like Chinese roofs, or like Asian roofs I should say. So all the elements are here, but then there's a lot of stuff that's added on top of it. Yeah, and honestly, I didn't completely nail it because the thing that was really cool was this, but I just didn't have time to do like the VFX. The thing that's also missing is like the blue glow behind it, which was really nice, but I couldn't figure that out at that point. And also maybe thinking about the scaling a bit more, where you have like these smaller clumps of trees instead of the bigger clumps of trees here, which really helps sell the scale of it. Because if you make these trees like half, like 50% smaller, then the tower is going to feel way bigger in comparison. But yeah, that's the thing. Like I would look at references and concepts and just change it up as you feel. It's your art, right? So truly make it yours. Stick to the fundamentals of that environment, and then add your stuff on top of it. That's a really good question, Sora. That's really good. I mean, in your example, because you're working on the train station, right? It's important to think about like what the story there is. Like, are you gonna stick with the story that it is now, like it's just an abandoned train station, or are you gonna infuse it with your own story? That's also why I keep bringing up story with people, like, because the story is such a fundamental piece of how you can influence the rest. Like, it's gonna dictate what kind of assets you're gonna put in there. It's gonna dictate what kind of color grading you're gonna do. It's gonna dictate the lighting. It's gonna dictate everything, basically. So I always say, like, the story is probably the best anchor point to start out with. So, well, not start out with, right? You always start from like references in the main idea, and then you add a story on top of that, and that's gonna dictate the rest of it. So yeah, good question, Sora. Thank you so much. I gotta go a little bit quicker, I think. Next question is from Adam. Considering the adoption rate of Blender at UB, what are some of the main selling points that tip the scale to start opening up the Autodesk monopoly? How would you as a senior try to sell it to expand and change the pipeline in a Max-dominated culture? I mean, I'm already working in Blender, right, for modeling purposes. The pipeline, changing the pipeline is, I mean, that's a difficult thing, right? Because we're talking about like millions and millions of dollars invested in like a pipeline that we have now. So, I mean, I could try to sell it, but then it's still like I'm not in charge of like millions and millions of dollars. But if I were to sell it, the main thing that I would definitely go on is just that it's free. Free in a sense where the base... Sorry, people. Sorry, where the base of it is free, but that doesn't mean that if the company is going to be involved in it, that it's going to be free, right? Because we're talking about the shift of the pipeline from one engine to another. So like we're talking man hours, we're talking... There's a massive time investment that goes into changing the pipeline if you wanted to. And also, I was thinking about this before we started to stream, but usually what happens is if there's a new program, IT has to check it for flaws or like security risks, right? Because leaks could happen. And that's the same thing here. Imagine, because Blender is so driven by add-ons, I think that could actually be a detriment for companies. So yeah, it could be a detriment for companies, right? Because then if you want to have like a new add-on, IT has to check it, and they have to do that for like every add-on that you get. So yeah, from that perspective, it might even be a bit more cumbersome. Hey Bikes, how you doing? So you wouldn't necessarily say that you stick with Blender if Max and Maya were free? Oh yeah, I would. I mean, but from a business perspective, that's the thing that they will probably have a look at first, right? And also, the second point that I would bring up is the quickness of the modeling. But that counteracts the point where if you have, let's say, 5,000 people, I'm just naming a random number here, right? 5,000 people that are working really fluently in Maya, and then you ask them to switch over to Blender because the pipeline is going that direction anyway. It's a long-term thing. Because in the beginning, people are going to be super slow in Blender. And if you think about it that way, then yeah. I mean, there's so many things when it comes to proposing something to a massive business, right? Because whenever you switch, it doesn't matter. Like, people are always gonna need a time to get back up to speed. So it's I'm even thinking about like project pipelines, right? So let's say when let's say this happens. So the company decides to make a change to Blender. It has to be in a way where it can't interfere with any of the project timelines. Which is also like an interesting thing just from a monetary perspective again, right? Again, we're talking about businesses. But yeah, I would say, like you said, it's more a monetary than pragmatic thing. Because we can say that it's super quick to model in Blender and compared to modeling in Maya and Max, but that is almost trivial at that point, right? Like, how do you compare that? Like, are we gonna have competitions of like people modeling in Maya and Max? I would even say that there's gonna be no direct winner there, because it's so dependent on the person itself. And then the viewport is nice, but how many times do you use the viewport in like a pipeline? Because you're always putting it into an engine anyway. So I guess it kind of could be good to test the texturing, but then yeah, I mean, you're testing that in Substance probably with like a specific post-processing sent to your game already. Most cases, right? I guess the speed difference would have to be ridiculous to make up for the pipeline implementation costs. Exactly. I think that's the main thing, right? I love Blender, but I would honestly love to see a platform agnostic workflow where not everything is embedded within one program. It needs to be flexible. It needs to be modular. That's the way that I think. So it could almost be like a standalone program that just links into the program that you're using. That's your career goal? Get good enough where I pick my software? Well, we still have to go through the workflow in Maya, in Max in this case. So the only thing that we're doing is just we add a bit of burden onto ourselves by having to export between softwares. So I wouldn't, from like a business perspective, again, like we might be slower than people using Max at this point. But yeah, I think that's where Blender also comes in with just like good add-ons, lots of flexibility, right? Where Max and Maya feel a bit more rigid. Get good enough where I pick my own software. Yeah, I'm just lucky that we're allowed to, really. Because I mean, I was modeling in Maya and Blender, in Maya and Max for all the time before that. And it's just because like a couple of people in our studio are really good at Blender that it probably opened up some opportunities within our studio. I agree with you, Tim. Oh, that's on the modular approach, right? Yeah, I would love to see that happen. Because then that is interesting from a business perspective. If you can just hire anyone that has any skill in any modeling program, you can just slot them in and they can just be hooked up into like the workflow, right? There's no onboarding process where they have to like learn a new program. It's just they're just hooked up and ready to go. So yeah, that's a really good question, Adam. Thank you so much. Next one is from Ben. For anything for your portfolio, do you do final touch-ups in Photoshop when it comes to lighting and other effects, or do you try to accomplish most of it in the engine or with Marmoset? It depends. It depends on what I use. I think the image that you're referring to is just the latest challenge thing that I finished. Most of that is done in photo, like Affinity Photo or Photoshop in this case, because I didn't really want it to figure out like compositing and like final touch-ups in Blender. It was just way quicker to do it in Affinity. You can do it in Blender if you want to, but I'm not familiar, so I just took a shortcut there. I also have no interest in learning that in Blender at all, so there's that. When I do stuff in Unreal Engine, I try to do most of it in the engine because I'm super familiar with those systems. So yeah, that's how I tackle it. And I guess that makes sense. Because doing it in Blender, it's not hooking up into like a game engine like you would normally would. So it doesn't really offer you any benefit if you show it off on your portfolio. Whereas if you do it in Unreal Engine, you can then show that, look, I can do like post-processing lighting and do like touch-ups in the engine, which can be a benefit to your portfolio. So yeah, that's it. Short and sweet. Next question from Louis Mesquita. How do you feel about cover letters? How useful are they actually? Oh god. God, should that make sense? Thanks, Ben. I hope that makes sense. Yeah, anyway. I always had the impression that your CV and your portfolio should be good enough, and then everything in your cover letter can be discussed in the interview. Just a waste of time for the candidate and the hiring manager. Yeah, I agree. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it for companies that ask it, right? I mean, that's the crux of it. I hate writing cover letters. I would probably not read them. I would like to talk to a person before reading a long letter where they have to sell themselves and most of it is fake anyway. Because if we're honest about that, like you're really just trying to sell your marketing skills at that point. Like it's not even about being genuine in most cases. So it takes more time, but just talk to people. If you're really interested in a candidate, just talk to people. You can get a good idea from their CV and portfolio. And if they then interest you, like what is a cover letter going to add to that? Because you're going to do an interview with them anyway. It's my opinion, of course. And we're also talking about artist roles here. For roles that are more HR related, or have to do with writing, it could be of benefit, but I don't know about that. Yeah, how do I feel about cover letters? I always hated them, and I kind of feel like they're pretty useless as an artist. But yeah, good question. Another one from Louis Mesquita. What do you do if you don't have the time for a 7 or 15 day art test? Can you ask for a shorter test? 2 days, for example, that can be done over the weekend, or you just don't apply until you have the free time to do a decent test. Always ask. It's the same as your first question, right? Always ask. If you don't have the time, if you absolutely have no time, because, I mean, look, some people have a family, some people have a full-time job, some people even do like a part-time job on top of that. How are you able to manage an art test? Like, it just doesn't work. So that might limit your chances at a company, right? Because some companies will definitely be like, oh, you can't do an art test? Well, we kind of need to have you do an art test for us. But I would definitely always apply and ask them. Again, case by case, right? If this is your absolute dream company and you absolutely want to get in, maybe taking time off is worth it, but it is a big risk if you don't get it, right? Because you're never going to get those days back. So it is a big risk. But yeah, always ask. It doesn't hurt to ask that stuff. And then we have the last question from Leon. When doing work for portfolios, I often hear that you can and should be more generous with polygons and texture sizes because you want things to be as pretty as possible, especially when it comes to props. Where do you draw the line between this looks super nice in my portfolio and they seem not to really care or know about optimization? Yeah, I mean, for props, I can see that you want to make it look really nice and pretty. Yeah, it's a tricky one. Because I always lean, even if it is a prop, just to not go overboard. Like, don't put 8K textures on it, for sure. Even think really hard about 4K textures. Unless it is like a really, really important prop. So you kind of need to see it as like, if it is a hero prop, if it's gonna be like the main thing, that's gonna be the storytelling aspect of your scene, then you can think about like adding like 4K textures on it and like lots of polygons, right? But if we're just talking about, I mean, yeah, if we're just talking about like supporting props, you can probably do it in like a way smarter way, where you could even start thinking about reusing textures, just doing it with tilables, doing it with trim sheets, just all that optimization. And when it comes to polygons, I saw a good thread on Twitter. I think it's from I think she's called Delaney King. I might be wrong in that. I need to check my sources real quick. But they were mentioning that it doesn't matter about the amount of polys. It's just that you don't waste them. Because, I mean, that's a good point, right? Yeah, Delaney King. Let's just, I think that's the person that I'm talking about. I think so. Optimize game art tutorials. I'll just link it in the chat, so if people want to check it out. She also has a good Twitter account. Can I link the Twitter in there too? But she's definitely worth checking out. Oh, there we go. Twitter. And then let's do this. Let me see if I can find a thread of where she was talking about optimizations. Here we go. That's the one. That's the thread that I was talking about. Like, she's totally right. Like, the amount of polygons doesn't matter. You just need to be nice and optimized. Like, if you just have wasted polygons all over your mesh, like, that shows that you don't know what you're doing with polygons and you don't really care about like budgets, right? But yeah, she broke it down really good. And then the difference is like really big, right? And if you showed it, you can take that into account and be like really cautious about how you use polygons. That's what we want to see. We don't want to see like just these lines that go across your model that don't add anything to the silhouette, because that's just a waste, right? Unless there's like a good use case where you can use them for vertex paint or something, right? If that is a legit use case that you wanna make, you could make that, but usually you don't need them. So yeah, I think that's the main thing, right? Don't waste anything. That's what game optimization is all about. Oh, all right. And oh wait, I forgot to check the anonymous questions. Let me double check if we don't have one there before we go on to our next segment. Quickly check. Nope, no anonymous questions. That's good. That is good. Oh yeah, it's totally about game textures. I mean, that's the whole stream, right? We're talking to the game environment artist at this point. Like if you don't have to render real time, then I mean it doesn't matter that much, because you can just you can just render it offline anyway and then stitch the frames together at any point. That's not a luxury that we have in oh, god damn it. We had a petition in Team 2 that we forgot about, and it was to request from now on all environment tips refer to trims as Tim sheets. God damn it. Okay, I mean, yeah, sure. Fucking Tim sheets. Oh, all right, cool. So that was all the questions for today. Now it's time for the next segment. Let me jump over to the Overpaint screen. Hey, there we go. I start with this one because this video is now available for all Vertex patrons and above. You can now watch the recording of the workshop with that we did with William. It's a pretty chunky one. I think the end result is like 2 hours 45 minutes or something. So it's definitely worth checking that out. Okay. But here we go. We got the first prop here from Ben. Let's have a look. What can we do here? Because it's mainly about the lighting, right? Like how to present it. Let me just quickly check again. Lighting or lens wise. Okay. Well, I'm gonna talk about the bigger picture here, right? The main thing that you're doing with lighting is highlighting all the nice edges, or like all the nice texture features that you added in. So this is a good example of that. Like it's showing you a lot of variation in this spot. You can apply that. You can sometimes even over exaggerate these things, right? Where the difference between this texture and this texture probably needs to be pushed a little bit. The reason why I focus on the texture first is that the lighting is only going to make them shine even more, right? So this highlight that you have here is highlighting that perfectly. So I would probably push that a bit more. And then think about the example that I always give is look at how they do like a studio setup, like a lighting setup for cars, where usually what they do is they use like really big softboxes to create like a fill light, and then add individual lights for stuff that they want to highlight specifically. So usually what this means is that they will probably have like a really big softbox like above or like in this case from this side, to maybe highlight like all these edges, like all these nice edges that you have here. I mean, there's a lot of detail here, right? So you want to separate those shapes out a little bit. And then you can add individual lights where you need like specific highlights, like these things that you're adding, right? Super nice spot, by the way, this. And then you can add a rim light like this, where you're just really nicely highlighting all these nice edges here, which is super good, right? So I would say that that rim light is in a really good position. It's just about the fill light and like lighting this whole section a bit more up and like pushing it a little bit. Yeah, that's a good suggestion, Adam. I think this field of view is pretty low already, right? I gotta say, like the field of view is not my strongest suit for sure. But yeah, that's the thing that you're doing, or trying to do, right? You're trying to emulate, hold on, let me give you an example. Our studio lights. Like these are the rigs that I look at, and like what they highlight too. Because you can see that most of them, they like nicely accentuate like all the curves, right? And separate the shapes from like the background and the foreground. Where it's less important to do that on the floor, because you want to have this grounded feeling of your mesh, right? So think about that, like try to emulate that. And that's also something that might be interesting to incorporate here, is if you have this, don't think about like only rendering this prop, but like give it something where it stands on. Like add like a shadow casting plane here, and maybe even make that like a factory floor or something like that. That could be really interesting, where just really simple materials, right? Just have like a nice section where you have like a concrete material or something that then fades out from this point on. And then this is going to cast like nice shadows on that plane, which is going to give it like this nice grounded feel. That is always really good. Yeah, like Adam said, like this is a really nice model, Ben. Really cool. Yeah, I'm thinking if there's something else. Let me just take a deep look into this. Because there's like a lot of nice variation on it already. Like the slight dirt here, like the texture variance between this element and this element is really good. Yeah, cool, Ben. I hope that helps. Sweet. If I learned one thing from the Beyondextent podcast, is that according to Will, lower FOV is always better. I mean, it's debatable, right? Because I'm a big fan of like really wide shots, but obviously the difference there is I'm mostly focused on environments, where Will is mostly focused on props, mostly, right? Because I feel you can do so much with a lens and like the field of view to really impose that like that feeling of grandeur. Oh yeah, according to Will. Because yeah, you can really do some cool stuff with like a really exaggerated field of views, and you can, I mean, yeah, you can do some crazy stuff there. Cool. I get paranoid with wide field of view shots because it's all my detail. Cool. Awesome, Ben. This is looking good. Let's have a look here. This is from Leon. Where is my... There we go. I was looking for my Discord for a second. Because you sent me a file as well yesterday. Let me have a look at that. Talking about studio lights, like my lights are just casting glare on my paint over screen. This is annoying. This is cool though. Like this, I had a quick look at it yesterday. Shift left click. Cool. Yeah, I think the main thing here... I mean, this one shows it off better than the one that I was looking at. But the main thing is definitely the lighting. Like, really making it nice. And, like, highlighting all those subtle details. You might have to also look into using a higher bit depth. Or like a higher... What is it? Like a TGA or something for the roughness. So that you don't get these compression artifacts. I don't know if that is from Marmoset or if that is coming from the textures themselves. I don't use Marmoset that often. Well, never. Just be honest about it. This is really cool, man. I love the attention to detail. I had to export it at a bit lower. Oh, okay. Yeah. That makes sense. Couldn't pick the unreasonable export option. That is cool, man. Yeah, because this one looks completely different than the one that we just looked at, right? Obviously, this is with the standard lighting in Unreal Engine, so obviously it's not gonna look as good. The thing that I was interested in is... let me just quickly look it up. Because I think I saw it in one of your reference images. And when it comes to the texturing, you can see it's not always cloudy, right? In terms of like what we can see here, for example. Like the color variation feels a little bit cloudy, where sometimes you want to see those streaks and it's more angular. Or like more sharp in its transitions. I'm trying to look for like a good example. I think you shared one of your things as well, right? Yeah. Okay. That's actually a good one. Should have looked at that one first. You can see some of these transitions. Like, it's very subtle, but let me grab my pen again. I didn't know we could send files. Well, I don't think files is the way that I want to go. I think pictures say it enough, right? But yeah, you can see the discoloration in the letter, right? You can have these like streaks, almost like really angular, like someone almost scratched it to create that discoloration. Like these kind of directional scratches that you can see here. Like that's the thing that I was looking for. It's very subtle, but that's really gonna set it apart from just the quote-unquote cloudy material that you have right now, right? And especially because I can imagine, like, just sitting in a leather sofa, that you have like where you have like the, what's it, like the creases where people would sit in, you would have these like brighter streaks that go especially across like the whole seating area. You would have like these crumples and like these streaks where you would have lighter edges going across it. Yeah, it could be from flexing the leather as well. It could be scratches, it could be flexing the leather. But it's like you can see it, right? These very light patterns that come across it compared to some of the more cloudiness that you can see here, just to make it stand out a little bit more. You can kind of... Yeah, I can see now. I mean, looking at my paint over screen doesn't do me justice in this case, because you can see it here now. Okay. Yeah, I would probably like accentuate it a little bit more. Yeah, also maybe the resolution is kind of fucking it up, right? Yeah, man, other than that, it's looking really nice already. The main thing is definitely going to be the lighting. The lighting is definitely going to make or break this. I like the color variation that you have already, which is really good. There's one thing... Oh, there's one thing that I wanted to bring up. If we look at the wood, especially... Oh, don't do that. Especially in Unreal Engine, specular is going to play a big part. Because usually you wouldn't really touch specular in most cases. But if you really want to fine-tune things, especially when it comes to wood, you have to look at specular and try to tweak that as well. And maybe even export a texture if you really want to go that way. Because the specular can control like the size of the highlight. So it gives you like finer control on top of the roughness, where that can be really important to make this wood material shine. Literally. So I would definitely look into that. Let's bring up some of the ref again. Billy Lundeval on YouTube has a great crash course on specularity. Yeah, I think I saw that. It does ring a bell. But yeah, that's a good place to start out, because this is the thing, right? Like they mention it as well in the documentation from Unreal Engine that 0.5, the base value of specularity, is going to be good for like 90% of the cases, because in a game setting, you're not really looking at like all these super specific details, right? But if you really want to go a step further and like push it into almost like ArcViz, what we're doing here, then you kind of need to tap your dip your toes into it. Like you need to understand specularity a bit to get the most out of it. Yeah. Yeah. Other than that, I would probably, again, just coming back to the color differences, right? Like push it a little bit more. Like this orange yellowy tone is like really nice. And that's, god damn it, I do it again. And that's something that I'm really interested in seeing a bit more in here. And then maybe even thinking about like dust gathering in between like these cushions, where the highlight here is nice, but maybe you wouldn't expect the highlight here. Like it's more broken up because of all the dirt that just gathered in there. Yeah, but really nice job so far, man. I like it. It looks so nice. Nice and shiny. Alright, cool. I see I reduced that in my last pass. And might need to bring it back again. Yeah, get some of that variation back in. Be good. Thanks again for the feedback. No worries. My pleasure. Okay. And I think that's going to be it for this week, right? Let me double check if someone else posted in there. Nope. We're all good. Yeah, I think this is fun. Like, I like doing these things. Just discussing these art-specific things. So I'll probably keep doing this for the foreseeable future. So I'll open it up like every week at a certain time and just get like people's work in progress posted in there. Just do like a live feedback session. Yeah, already working. Hell yeah. Yeah, I want to do some work today too. I didn't do anything yesterday. I was doing some other boring stuff. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing your work with me as well. This is cool, Ben and Leon. Thanks so much. Might want to advertise a bit. Yeah, that's the thing. I'm always so last minute when doing these things. I'm always like, oh, that would be cool. And then the day before, I'm like, hey guys. So I need to advertise it definitely way more. Cool. No problem. Awesome. All right, everyone. I think that's going to be a nice and concise stream. Thanks so much for all the good topics, all the good suggestions. And yeah, thanks again for sharing the work, which was awesome. I'm going to do some more work myself now. And yeah, as always, if you're interested in this, if you want to be a part of the community, feel free to join our Patreon. We have a great little community where we give feedback like this to each other. And it's just nice to see everyone grow together like this. All right. Have a nice Sunday, everyone. See ya.